Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining from, and welcome to the Cybersecurity 101 Training for Water Systems webinar. My name is Vijal Pancholi, and I will be leading the majority of today's webinar. I am a cybersecurity specialist with the EPA's Water Infrastructure and Cyber Resilience Division. Here is the agenda of events for the discussion today. I'm so glad to have you all here, as this is going to be an information-packed webinar, which will help you better understand the basics of cybersecurity, as well as some of the important components of a cybersecurity program. The goal here today is to help all of you understand that cybersecurity truly begins with basic concepts. So, without any further delay, let's go ahead and get right into it. This here is the standard textbook definition of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information by protecting your digital systems and networks from unauthorized access or usage. When a water utility has weak protections and protocols in place, the integrity of the water utility, as well as the well being of the community, is endangered. Having baseline knowledge of cybersecurity and putting that knowledge into practice can greatly reduce the risk of a cyber attack. So, why is cybersecurity important to you? Well, cybercrime cost victims a total of $6.9 billion in 2021, which is staggering considering the cost in 2020 was 4.2 billion. Cybercrime is growing at about 15% each year, and cybersecurity really should be considered in all facets of life, both personal and professional. The reason for this is because a cyber attack can not only affect your job, but there are people who suffer cyber attacks at home every day as well. And why is cybersecurity important for the water system? Well, cyber attacks could negatively impact public health if changes occur in the treatment process. Cyber attacks could also cause service disruptions that can linger for multiple days. And cybercriminals could gain access to protected employee and customer information and use it to damage their identity. We are all, including our families, direct consumers of the water that we are trying to protect. So now we're going to go over some of the commonly used terms that you will hear throughout the presentation today. The first of those terms is information technology, or IT. This is the systems that collect, store, and process data. This can be your computer or your server. Next up, we have operational technology. This is the hardware or software that detects or causes a change through direct monitoring of industrial equipment. Best example of this is the SCADA system. Up next, we have ports. Ports are a virtual point where network connections start and end. Next, we have a firewall. Firewall is a device that restricts data communication traffic between two connected networks. Next, there is software. These are programs that are used by a computer. Next, speaking of computers, we have hardware. The hardware is the physical computer or server and all the associated components. And finally, we have operating system. The operating system is a software that supports a computer's basic functions. Easiest way to describe that is Microsoft Windows. Now that we know what cybersecurity is, why it's important, and a few commonly used terms, let's move on to the 101 overview. Let's start off with understanding the steps needed to establish a cybersecurity program, also known as governance and training. Governance is how an organization controls its security, while training will help ensure that everyone understands how to lower the chances of a cyber attack. The first step in any organization's program is to identify a cybersecurity lead. With public water systems frequently the target of cyber hackers, the need for protection against an endless and increasing number of cybersecurity threats is imperative. Therefore, it is essential to identify an individual or individuals to serve as your organization's IT and OT cybersecurity lead. This individual should act as a centralized point of contact responsible for overseeing and managing the planning, resourcing, and execution of cyber activities for IT and OT systems. They should also be well versed in different security technologies and understand how they work and be aware of the latest trends and information in IT and OT cybersecurity. Now, one thing to note, this can be the same individual. However, if they are different, please ensure that they build and maintain a strong working relationship. The next step is to establish a cybersecurity policy. This will be handled by the cybersecurity lead. Now, a cybersecurity policy offers guidelines for employees to access company data and use IT and OT systems to minimize security risks. The policy often includes instructions for employees to ensure maximum protection from cybersecurity attacks such as virus infection, ransomware attacks, etc. The primary purpose of cybersecurity policy is to enforce security standards and procedures to protect your utility systems, prevent security breaches, and safeguard your network. A cybersecurity policy typically includes four things, and they are the remote access policy, which offers guidelines for remote access to an organization's network, the access control policy, which explains standards for network access, user access, and software system controls, the data protection policy, which provides guidelines for handling confidential data to avoid security breaches, and then the acceptable use policy, which sets standards for using the company's IT and OT infrastructure. The next step in a program is to conduct cybersecurity training. At a minimum, this training should occur annually. Cybersecurity awareness training helps everyone recognize and respond to cyber threats, which helps to improve overall security posture and cyber resilience. Cybersecurity awareness training often outlines an employee's role and responsibility in cybersecurity. It highlights key concepts in an organization's IT and OT cybersecurity policy and the common security threats and vulnerabilities when using IT or OT systems. Now, this training should be tailored for all public water system personnel within the organization, focus on how to remain compliant with your organization's cybersecurity policy. It should help to understand how to prevent cyber attacks and protect system information. It should provide OT specific cybersecurity training for those who use OT systems, and it also should be mandatory for all employees annually. And one of the additional critical steps in establishing the program is to prepare for cybersecurity threats. They are growing every day, and it is important to remain prepared. The cybersecurity lead should understand the current tactics, techniques, and procedures, which are also called TTPs, of cyber attacks to better prepare and increase cyber resilience. TTPs are the methods, tools, and strategies cyber threat actors use to develop and execute cyber attacks. Utilities can sign up to receive CISA alerts and bulletins to stay aware of the TTPs associated with the latest cyber threats. CISA alerts provide timely information about current security issues, vulnerabilities, and exploits, and the CISA bulletins provide weekly summaries of new vulnerabilities, including patch information when available. So now that you've established your program, let's move on to some of the components of the program that require your attention. Account security is important, so let's learn more about properly securing accounts that you use to connect to all the various systems at your utility. The first step in protecting user accounts is to avoid the use of default passwords. A default password is a standard pre-configured password for a device or software. Such passwords are the default configuration for many devices and, if unchanged, present a serious security risk. You should always change default passwords for all IT and OT systems. Now, there may be cases when it may be unable to be changed, and where this happens, please isolate the equipment and schedule to check the logs for any unusual sign-ins. And as you change the passwords, ensure they are also protected and not shared across multiple users. Passwords provide the first line of defense against unauthorized access to an organization's IT and OT systems and information. The stronger your password, the more protected your computer will be from hackers and malicious software. Organizations should maintain strong passwords for all accounts on your computer. You want to enforce password length and complexity. This requires all employees to create long and complex passwords that should, at minimum, be 8 characters long and contain one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, and one symbol. Simply put, everyone has been forced to create a complex password at one point. Banking websites, shopping websites, even personal email accounts will generally require a complex password to create an account because they understand the importance of securing those accounts. In order to further protect user accounts, usernames and passwords, also known as credentials, should be different for users who access both IT and OT networks. Here, I have a simple graphic depicting that practice. As you can see, the user has two different credentials for each system. The primary reason for this practice, if an account for the IT system is compromised, having the same credentials for the OT system would allow the attacker to immediately compromise that network as well. Now, moving on to verifying your user accounts. Some of you may have heard of multi-factor authentication, which is also known as MFA. MFA, or two-step verification, is a security feature that allows the user to present two pieces of evidence that confirm their identity when logging into your user account. These include something you know, such as a password or a PIN, something you have, such as a smart card or a smartphone, or something you are, such as your fingerprint or facial recognition. The best way to explain this for me is by using cell phones. A lot of us have a cell phone that uses a passcode to unlock them, but also have the option to unlock using facial recognition or sometimes even doing an iris scan. MFA would be if you had to use the passcode and your facial recognition just to log into your smartphone. Now, MFA is more secure than the username and password verification login method, as it eliminates the risk of hackers using stolen passwords and users reusing and sharing passwords. Many IT and OT software platforms come with an option that will allow the IT support staff to enable and configure MFA. Now, MFA may not be a suitable option for all public water systems. Leadership, the cybersecurity lead, and the IT OT support should work together to evaluate if MFA is viable for their IT and OT environment. In addition to having separate accounts, it's also important to manage access privilege within your IT and OT systems. One of the key ways to do this is to separate administrative accounts from common user accounts. Ensure that common user accounts do not have the same amount of access that administrators have. For example, they should not be able have the ability to create other user accounts. In addition, your organization should also disable or limit access to an account or network when access is no longer necessary. For example, when an employee retires or is fired from the organization, their credentials should be immediately deactivated. Just recently, we heard of an employee who was fired from a utility and used his credentials to hack back into the system and caused an impact to the utility. The best way to think of user privileges as is parental controls. Would you want your child to create an Amazon account with your credit card and buy anything they wanted? Probably not. Moving on to blocking logins on certain occasions, such as too many unsuccessful login attempts by an account. Login blocks lock a user's account and require the user to reset the password in order to unlock the account. The reason for this is to prevent a brute force cyber attack, which is where an attacker uses a program to repeatedly enter different passwords to try and guess the password. Have you ever had to enter a password wrong too many times and had to reset your password to unlock your account? That essentially is a login block being triggered. Finally, in account security, administrators should enable email security controls. Security controls on emails can reduce common email-based threats. And these are three of the most common ones. So there's spoofing, which is tricking a user into thinking the email is from a trusted source to click on a malicious link that will download some sort of malware to the system. There's phishing, which is tricking a user into entering personal information into a fake website. And then there's interception, which, if you think about it, is like an interception in football. The email is captured while in transmission to the intended recipient. You want to ensure that all controls are enabled on corporate email structures, and this can be easily done in the security controls through Office 365 Outlook, Google Workplace, or whatever program you use for emails. Now that we have learned how to properly secure the accounts used to access the systems, let's move on to understanding how you can secure the devices that these accounts are being used on. A lot of these things should be handled by the cyber lead that we discussed earlier, but the information is useful for everyone to know as you understand the basics of cybersecurity. Do you have an inventory of all the equipment in your treatment and distribution system? It is equally important to maintain an accurate inventory of IT and OT assets. This will help your utility in recovery in the event of a cyber attack. The simplest way to do this is a spreadsheet, and you should update it monthly or more frequently if you make a change in less than 30 days. You can't protect what you don't know you have. This list will include all of your hardware, such as, your computers, laptops, cell phones, etc. And I've included a little version of an Excel spreadsheet that is an example of what it should look like. In addition to inventorying all of your hardware, you should also inventory your software. By maintaining accurate software records, a utility can greatly increase response and recovery times to a cyber incident, as well as help with vulnerability management. You want to maintain a detailed record of critical IT and OT system software, and this should include information such as the firmware and software versions, as well as making a note of all the important configuration settings. It's really easy to lose track of which software versions you have, so this can help keep track of everything so that you know when and what to patch. You should also prohibit unauthorized hardware connections. This can prevent cybercriminals from achieving initial access or even data exfiltration. Unauthorized hardware should never be allowed to be connected to the systems. This can include items such as USB thumb drives, external hard drives, laptops, or even cell phones. Unauthorized hardware connections can be disabled by your administrator with a group policy on Windows. Training and spreading awareness is also essential to changing the behaviors of your employees. Another key control that can be used to secure your device is to require administrator approval to reduce the likelihood of a breach. When users install unapproved firmware or software, they could introduce new vulnerabilities into a system. Only network administrators should have the ability to install new software or firmware, and your administrator or cyber lead can enable admin approval mode in user account controls. And finally, in this section, your utility should disable executable codes. Executable codes, such as Microsoft Office macros, can be used by cyber criminals to discreetly install malware onto a computer or a network. Microsoft Office macros can be disabled within the Trust Center. And the primary reason for that these should be disabled is because they can be configured to potentially run malware or viruses in the background of a system. We have discussed how to secure your accounts and how to secure your devices. But what about all the data that is transmitted between the different networks? Well, let's take a dive into data security. Once again, the cybersecurity lead will be handling a majority of this, but this section contains information that is important to understand by everyone. The first item that we need to cover within data security are logs. Logs will provide information on what's going on in your network. Your system administrator or cyber lead should ensure that your system logs are being collected and reviewed daily. Collecting security logs can help achieve better visibility to detect and effectively respond to a incident. Collect and store logs on network traffic related to security incidents and suspicious activity such as network access and malware detection. Now that we've discussed the importance of collecting security logs, let's cover why it's important to protect the security logs. You want to ensure the logs are properly stored in a central system that can only be accessed by users who are both authorized and authenticated. Now, the image shown here shows how the logs will appear. The main reason you want to protect the logs is because they contain information such as network activity, and they could be manipulated by attackers to hide any malicious activity. Another important concept to cover in data security is encryption. It is important to use effective encryption. Encryption protects information while in transit. Your administrator or cyber lead should enable SSL or TLS, which stands for Secure Socket Layer or Transport Layer Security, to protect the data in transit. Now, many web browsers have this enabled by default, and it can be identified by a lock symbol like shown in the image here. Now, in order to explain how TLS function works, it can be explained by this graphic. So the client and the server will say hello in the form of a virtual handshake, and then the session keys are exchanged. After that, they will decide which cipher suite to use, which essentially is just a set of algorithms that are used for establishing a secure connection. Once all this is done, the connection is secure and the communication will continue without any obstruction. Now, we have talked about encrypting the data in transit, but what about the data that is stored on your networks? Encrypting your data can help maintain the confidentiality of sensitive data and integrity of both IT and OT networks. Do not store any sensitive data in plain text format, such as Word or Notes. And you want to only allow access to sensitive data to authorized and authenticated users. Now, this is really important because a majority of the time, plain text documents aren't protected in any way, which makes them quick and easy targets for attackers. So, we have taken a trip through securing accounts, securing devices, and securing data. But what about vulnerabilities? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at some vulnerability management. Now, you can limit your exposure to known vulnerabilities by patching systems and software regularly. Cybercriminals often use known vulnerabilities to exploit or breach a network. So, to combat this, you want to identify and install updates, also known as patches, for vulnerabilities as quickly as possible. Now, if patching isn't possible, please perform enhanced monitoring, which means increasing the number of times that you are checking your logs. Now, this can easily be explained by asking, what do you do if you have a hole in a pipe? What about a hole in your jeans? You cover it up with some sort of patch. That is the same concept as patching software. A major area of network exposure is internet access, which can increase vulnerability by a lot. Limiting internet exposure to systems and networks can help close any potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities that would otherwise be present. You want to ensure systems don't have any unnecessary internet exposure by eliminating unused or exposed ports and services. And you also want to avoid connecting OT assets to the internet as much as possible. This goes back to one of the commonly used terms I mentioned earlier. A port is a virtual point where network connections start and end. An easier way to explain this is to imagine a port is like a window or a door to your house. If you leave the window or the door open, anything can come on in. So you have secure devices and software that you already have at your utility, but what about devices or software that you are looking to acquire? This is where we are going to take a look at supply chain and third party security. Another possible way to introduce any vulnerabilities to your network is to add hardware or software that has not been properly evaluated to see if they contain any known vulnerabilities. When considering new IT or OT purchases, your cybersecurity lead or administrator should assess the compatibility with your existing network protocols and identify any potential vulnerabilities. Only purchase equipment once it has been assessed and approved. We've learned a lot of different things that we can do to secure our accounts and devices and how to ensure that systems we bring in are secure. But what do we do if a cyber incident still occurs? Well, let's take a look at response and recovery. The first item we need to cover within response and recovery is the incident response plan. Your cybersecurity incident response plan should be integrated into your overall emergency response plan. An incident response plan is a document with detailed procedures on how to respond to a cyber incident, which can help minimize response and recovery times. The document should contain information such as who do you contact and how do you contact them. Maintaining physical and virtual copies of the document while updating the plan based off incidents will help ensure its effectiveness. Also, practicing the response plan by conducting tabletop exercises, also known as TTXs, will help to greatly improve response times to an incident. Now that we have created the incident response plan, how do we make sure that we can recover our systems in the event of an incident? That comes in the form of system backups. Backing up a system greatly reduces the likelihood and duration of data loss and loss of operation. All systems that are necessary for operation should be backed up no less than once per year. Backups should be stored separately from source system and tested regularly, again, no less than once per year. The final step to having a proper response and recovery plan is to maintain up to date network documentation. Maintaining accurate documentation of the network layout can efficiently and effectively reduce cyber attack response times as well as help maintain service continuity. This documentation should include detailed information on both IT and OT networks, which include information such as the network topology type, which I've included a graphic to explain the different network layouts. So the first type is a bus connection where devices directly connect to each other and transmit data between links. There's a ring topology which connects devices next to each other in the form of a circle. There's mesh where each device connects to each every other device on the network. There's star which has a central device which transmits data to the other devices. And then there's a tree topology which connects devices down in a structure resembling a tree. The last one is hybrid, which consists of two different topologies in the network. Now, there are a few important topics that just don't quite fit into the sections before. So we're going to continue this training in a section that is simply labeled Other Security Topics. Many of your utilities have an IT and OT network. Your IT networks typically manage business functions such as accounts management, while your OT networks manage operational processes. Network segmentation is the separation of IT and OT networks by placing a barrier between them, such as a firewall. It can help reduce the likelihood of the OT network being compromised if the IT network is compromised, or vice versa. All connections to OT networks should be denied by default, unless from approved devices which are allowed for specific system functionality. Your cyber lead or administrator can start this process if your networks are currently connected. And today, we covered fundamental practices that your utility should consider implementing to increase your resilience to cyber attacks. Cybersecurity hygiene refers to using the right technology, which is choosing the right devices and software, best practices, like those identified today, and user education, such as implementing annual training for all employees to establish a healthy internal cybersecurity culture. Implementing the practices covered today, you can increase your utility's ability to resist cyber threats and reduce the risk of a successful cyber attack. After you have implemented the practices that we discussed today and increase your cybersecurity resilience, you may still fall victim to a cyber attack. If this happens, knowing who to report to is a critical element of your response. Currently, there is no requirement to report to the federal government. However, Reporting cyber incidents provides you with federal assets such as FBI support with law enforcement response and CISA and EPA support with technical assistance. Please add this contact information to your incident response plan. Thank you all so much for your time today. I really hope all the information today helped to ease the stress of understanding cybersecurity. Please feel free to contact us at the email shown here if you have any further questions.